1, 2, 3. Testing. 1, 2, 3. What's going on, Gray? You got the thumbs up. What's going on, everybody? Justin Thomas here with Gray Area. Welcome to episode 4 of the Storyteller series. George R.R. Martin. Can I get a it's all good in the chat as far as my audio? I'm actually gonna check it because I think sometimes you guys are just too nice and you say it's good and I listen to it and it's repulsive. All right, it sounds about right. Always feel free to be critical, everybody. But let's not waste any time. I have with me longtime friend, one of the best out there. Can't think of anybody better for some good old George R.R. Martin. Gray Area, introduce yourself to anybody that's been under a rock. Let them know what you're all about.
Hello, my name is Gray Area from the YouTube channel Gray Area. Host of the Obsidian Nights podcast, lover of all things A Song of Ice and Fire. And we're going to be talking about George R.R. Martin.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I wanted to plug the Obsidian Nights and we're going to talk about it. I have been tasked with Ned 2, right, for the POVs for our episode, and you have made me break an oath. Because when the series ended, I had, and don't hate me for it, people, but I said, I don't think I'm going to recommend the books to anybody until I see wins. Meaning, if somebody comes up to me and says, oh, should I read that? I'm like, well, I don't, it's not finished yet. And I was being a little bit prudish. So I was like, I'm just going to kind of steer away from it. I found it a little bit toxic with everybody letting me know. And we're going to do a short review of D&D to get it out of the way. I knocked it out earlier. Very, very inclusive and really just a really good take on D&D from my part that we'll show in a minute. But Gray, you have turned me around with the Obsidian Nights podcast. This is like prime Gray Area. I know you started it with Quinn. You've had 4 or 5 episodes so far?
10.
See?
So I started with Quinn, and me and Quinn did the first 3 episodes together, and then we did a special on Stannis with Brendan B. Fish from the Notacast. But Quinn got really busy with his book, so he had to kind of step away, and he's going to come back for a couple episodes. If you want to reread the books, reread them with me.
Yes. I'm glad handing a little bit here, but no, I'm serious. I was at first I was like, yeah, I'm interested in going back through because I love Gray and all that in doing Eddard too with you. And then I started listening to the podcast and I got really excited again about my reread, and I just started it last week. I've just been loving it, and it's the perfect companion podcast for this, and it's got me just back. The long night juice is back, and I'm not going to be a dick and say, oh, he hasn't finished them yet, so don't start reading it to anybody. I recommend everybody reads it, obviously. I just had a case of the blues. So speaking about them, let's knock it out right away. I did a D&D because we got about an hour here review about how they do story, and we'll go ahead and just we'll air that really quick. What's going on? This is a Storyteller series. I'm your host, Justin Thomas, and today we're talking about how Dave and Dan tell a story. And it is not good. Leaves a lot to be desired. Not good. Thank you. Wow. That's actually really powerful stuff right there. I actually think a lot about what I do, and it doesn't seem like I do I? Yeah, it makes me question my decision. But I didn't want to separate that for another video. Maybe I'll release it. But yeah, definitely very good work by me. So we will start with George R.R. Martin, born in Jersey. Grew up he describes it as always like this 5-block span. He lived in a small world. His family used to own this store. He'd pass it every day on his way to school. The family didn't even have a car, but his dad was a longshoreman in Jersey, so he could always see the ships, just like Sansa ships, and he'd always see the different flags, and he'd mark them down and always think about all these different places they're going and make up these stories about this, even from a young child. And it's kind of cool because he used to write these short stories or these comics even as a child, before he was even doing the whole Marvel stuff that we'll get into, and he was writing to sell so he could actually buy books to read. You know what I mean? Like he said, I'd write 2 stories, sell them so I could buy comic books. So it's like, I believe we spoke about this off air earlier. It's like good writers really love to read. They have to,
Yes.
so it's just, I don't know. I find that to be a little bit moving. We'll briefly cover some of George's earlier works. Did you want to talk about Night Flyers or anything from what is now deemed the Thousand World Book Club?
I will just say, that George doesn't really write a lot of fantasy, unless you consider fantasy and sci-fi the same thing. I know a lot of people do. He writes a lot of horror, and he writes a lot of sci-fi. You can see, like, in some of his earlier works, they are depressing. They're kind of sad. They don't really have happy endings. I mean, he does a lot of the same themes over and over. Um, of course, a lot of the same tropes, as many writers do. But I do think that George handles tropes a little differently, which I guess we can talk about that later. But I mean, basically, at heart, like, he's a horror writer. And most of the stories that I've read from him that I actually enjoy, which I would say probably my favorite three are, besides The Song of Ice and Fire, because of course that's number one, but my favorite three outside of that are Sand Kings, Night Flyers, and Fever Dream.
Yeah, he has a psychological horror style to especially his earlier work, but just like, it's natural that we see a lot of the blueprint for A Song of Ice and Fire, and a lot of, it's a lot of existentialism. There is a lot of doom and dread, but just like A Song for Laya. Why do I keep?
I think it's A Song for Laya.
Laya, yeah, that is playing with the whole idea of same with the going into darkness and the light, or I'm blanking on the name of that.
Dying of the Light.
Dying of the Light, the spinoff of the Dylan Thomas poem. Don't Go Gently. I know Dylan Thomas. I can't remember that. Top shelf. So, but yeah, about how to not go sweetly into that night. About everybody's doomed, but they're living the best they can anyways. Existentialism. All these tropes. That he does play around with, but he always injects real people into it. And I know it sounds silly, but it is very hard to write real people, to connect with people, because the optics of storytelling are very, very daunting and different than real life. It's not a psychoanalysis, it's much different. We see how he plays with perspective and POV, right, to make us not relate just not only to character, but to location, background, to their culture, and so we get these socioeconomical problems, we get ideology, we get everything. Interpersonal and intercontinental, all the way around.
Yeah. I mean, so George does that with Winterfell. And in an interview he did in Chicago, he basically said, like, I want these places. I want people to feel for these places the way they feel about characters. And I think one place he really did that well with was Winterfell. So Winterfell is the first place we go to. We spend a lot of time there. It's happy. It's kind of upbeat. We're learning all of these new things, and then through the story, our characters, our protagonists, are constantly, when they're in these crazy situations, it's Winterfell that, like, keeps them going. Like Arya, when she's in the House of Black and White, the candles that burn, she smells Winterfell. She won't get rid of a needle because it's Winterfell. John is the same with the Winterfell crypts. Like, he dreams of them all the time. And it's just, and Tolkien did the same thing in the Lord of the Rings, like with the Shire. Like, when Sam was going to, when he thought he couldn't do something, he would think of home, and it would give him the power to do it.
Their foundation, it's their strength, it's their emotional spine. Winterfell is so pivotal. And one of the last podcasts that I listened was with you and Joe the Magician, and I loved your guys' breakdown talking about it. This is a very good example of this, when he's showing us how these characters all connect with Winterfell, but they all connect with Winterfell in different ways. And that shows, it's a different characterization of the place, thus the person. Bran connects differently to Winterfell than, say, Robb. He even says it, right? He says Robb doesn't know Winterfell like he does. They all have this connection to the North, but they all embody it in a different way. And we also see the clash of cultures right away. Bran wants to be, this hero a little bit. He wants to be maybe a Kingsguard, but have there been any Northern, Kingsguard? I know there's a few knights, but no Kingsguard.
No, and really knights, like Northern Knights.
It's not the norm, but Jorah's one.
Is he?
Well, we're okay. We got about an hour, so we'll say he was knighted. Yeah, even if he said he almost, pissed on the king's foot, but yes, he was knighted.
It's just like, and that's another thing about Martin's writing. So he makes things ambiguous, like with the timeline. He makes it purposely have so many conflicting stories, because a knight is something like you're knighted in the faith of the seven. If you're a northerner and you worship the old gods, what do you need to be a knight for?
Yeah. Well, and that's the clash, because just because you're from the North, so the climate's different, right? Okay, so that actually does change the culture, because you have to have different values and different ways of living, but also the gods are different than the South. Also, the gods differ when you go across the narrow sea. When George first plotted out this story, he had 3 threads, right? He had the North, which was the Starks, he had the Lannisters, and then he had Dany across the narrow sea. So we get these ideological, the contrast with the ideological, the actual culture, the religion, and then the interpersonal. And these clash so well together, and they're very well, like almost laser precision, right? With POV chapters of showcasing. He starts with a 10-year-old, or a 7-year-old, excuse me, that gets pushed out of a window. We actually see at the very beginning something that is kind of funny, because it's always said that A Song of Ice and Fire was made so it couldn't be adapted. But George uses something called an act break every single time he breaks from a POV in his books. He's talked about this. An act break is like when you have to go to your commercial. It's a mini cliffhanger. We see one of the biggest cliffhangers, right, when Bran is pushed from the tower. And then we want to know if he's still alive. But then we switch over to Tyrion, or we have Tyrion in a situation, it'll switch to Arya. So you want to figure out what's going to be happening with Tyrion, but you got to wait a few POVs to get there. It's really genius storytelling, but it's isolating these situations and perspectives within different cultures, societies, climates, and mindsets. And I just find that to be beautiful.
I mean, that's the thing about George. So George writes, the world is like that. So the world has a bunch of different cultures, a bunch of different religions, a bunch of different climates and sections of the world where life is really different from where I live or where you live. Even in like this country, state to state, it's different. And that's one of the reasons that I fell in love with A Song of Ice and Fire, because if you take away the dragons, it is a regular story that could be real. Yeah, the direwolves might be pushing it a little bit, but like I feel like I have a bond with my dog. I mean, I can't skin change her, but I have a bond with her. You know what I mean? So like there are aspects of realism there. And George balances the fantasy so well. Like when the books first start out, there's really, if you take away the prologue, there's really no magic. It starts to slowly come back. He introduces it real slowly. And I love the way that he treats magic. He treats it like he said, you treat magic like your story is a stew and the magic is a seasoning, and you don't want to over season it. You need it to be just right. And like a lot of fantasy stories, their stew is too seasoned. Like Westworld, in my opinion, it's really not fantasy. I guess it's sci-fi, but the magic is too much.
Yeah, I mean, well, George is dealing with a soft magic system. You have soft and hard systems. It's definitely a soft magic system. I totally agree. Even when it comes to the dragons, wouldn't you say that those are, Dany calls them her kids, but they are her kids, right? So we can understand. I mean, I'm not a father cross my fingers. But but I get that relationship. I'm familiar with it, right? Like, wouldn't you say that, maybe Cersei's not the best example, but Cersei cares about her kids, Dany cares about her children. Her children happen to be these winged giants. So you can write fantastical characters, but make their emotions real. And that's all that matters. It's empathy. I've spewed this a lot on my channel because empathy is the one emotional connection you need. You don't need to understand. I mean, you don't need to back what characters are doing. You don't need to support it, but you do need to understand they think that's what they need to do. And empathy is the key to that. You don't back maybe what Sansa's doing. Get into it, or vice versa, in that whole fight. But you should understand that character thinks they need to do the thing that you hate they're doing. They think they're backed into that corner.
See, I think that he writes so well, like a Catelyn Stark. I hate Catelyn Stark.
Yeah.
And I hate her because George has written her just like my own stepmother from my life. Like, she's that realistic to me that I don't care what she does good. I hate her. And I don't like her. Like, and it's a testament to George because he's writing these characters to be realistic. Like, no one wants to read a story about the good hero that does everything good and never does anything that's morally ambiguous. Nobody wants to read that story. We've read them. We've read them all.
Yeah.
So he's doing what other writers don't really do.
He also he's talked about how Tolkien, who obviously it's an homage to his work, and there's no hate towards Tolkien, but where did the hobbits come from? You don't think about the sexualization of them or or just procreation. Forget sexual, maybe not the best verbiage there, but procreation. It's like, where do they come from? But it's important because here's my thing with Catelyn. I wonder, and this is probably stupid, but like, just a testament to his story, it frustrates me that Ned just doesn't tell Catelyn, because then it makes me wonder about their relationship, right? Because it's like he's willing to go through all that grief with Jon, right? Like, so it's like, and he couldn't trust her. Like, I've always thought about that. But if you wouldn't think about that, if you wouldn't have had the injection of one of the biggest, like, relationship threads we have is who? Cersei and Jaime, the twins. So again, it's, I wouldn't say fantastical, but it's not your norm, but it's based in solid emotion that is, it's a good foundation. So you're buying into it and you're thinking about these people as people. And that is easier said than done, for sure. I mean, if I'm sitting there wondering, well, I guess he just can't trust Catelyn. What does that say about their relationship? I mean, he's done his work.
Do you know how many people, myself included, were so upset about what happened to Daenerys? It's not because it is because we have invested all this time into this character that we love, that George is writing, and George is writing a certain way. And while she may go this way with fire and blood, and you cannot move her from where she was to there in a straight line, which is what bad storytellers do. They go here, but we need her to go but we don't have time to show any of the in between. So George does zigzags and crisscrosses to get them where they need to go. And I really do believe that we're not just looking at 2 more books. We're looking at 3 more books. Hopefully. Maybe more. I know his wife said that, like, she thought it would be 3 more.
Yeah, but how much does she trust her? You know what I mean? I don't know. No, I'm joking. But no, yeah, I've always used the metaphor of, like, your grandparents are telling you, like, this really good story as a kid, and then all of a sudden you got to get rushed somewhere. So, like, they finish it from the front seat, they turn around, they're like, then King's Landing burns, and then all this, like, it was like all this fleshed out, very, very detailed, nuanced story, and then it just goes to the cliff notes. So yeah, if you guys didn't see my excellent review earlier about Dan and Dave, just rewind it back. I covered it. It wasn't good. Yeah, and I get it because people have an emotional attachment to this, and it's something that you should not rush, because that's where you come into a lack of empathy because you don't actually understand what's happening, which means they're not buying the bullshit. Literally, your story, people aren't buying into it because all you have to do, again, easier said than done, is make them believe your characters would do what they do. That's it. Not applaud it, but you have to make them believe that we won't get into it, but I completely get all that. George is somebody that has, worked within Hollywood. He had 3 successful books in the 70s, but his short stories are really what still live on more today and what's known as the Thousand World Book Club, like we spoke about. And you see a lot of the, I always like to say that, like,
I don't think it's called the Thousand World Book Club.
It's like a pseudo name. I don't know.
It's the Thousand World Universe.
There you go. So, but I got a book club. I'm gonna have to register that after this. You got me on that one. But when we're looking at his work, he worked on Beauty and the Beast. He worked on the Twilight Zone. In the Twilight Zone, he speaks about a lot of the issue of, in the 50s, when he was growing up watching it, it was always the twist ending, right? Surprising people. And what you're talking about with George finishing his books, I think part of what makes his storytelling so good is that George, just as he does not like reading those stories that you talk about, the ones where what's going to happen, there's no ambiguity. He sees a lot of power in ambiguity, I believe. He also doesn't like writing stories like that. So he has to keep himself on the edge of his seat.
If you look at his initial outline,
yeah,
compared to what we have, you could tell that he's not that archetype writer that plans all these plot points out and makes sure he hits them. He's that gardener that spreads seeds out, many different seeds, and then waters the ones that he wants to grow. So, for example, like R plus L equals J. Yes, he did the groundwork for that, but he also put in groundwork for Ashara and Ned to be a smokescreen for sure, to be a smokescreen for RLJ. But I'm sure he didn't want it to be as obvious as a lot of people found it to be. There's a lot of work for King Bran. You can see it when you go back and read. There's a lot of work for it. It's theories like Tyrion being a Targaryen or Tyrion being Lannister. There's so much that supports both theories. It's like, like I said in my video the other day, I don't even know if he's made up his mind which way he's going to go, or if he's leaving space for him to be able to decide one way or the other.
I think it's the power in ambiguity. I think that it won't ever be disclosed. I think that it'll leave it up in there because questions like that are good questions because it makes you think, what does it mean to be a Targaryen? What does it mean to be a Lannister? Those are good questions. And there's the power in that ambiguity. So that's just, I think that I always like to say that his style of writing makes the best story possible. The most efficient style of writing? Absolutely not. It obviously isn't, but it's quality versus quantity. I do hope he finishes all the books. I really do, because I think that, it is important to end stories, but I'm just back into the A Song of Ice and Fire world completely doing this reread that I can enjoy these stories isolated. Like I said, he uses these POVs with like laser precision to give us, to not have Robb as a POV character is so interesting. It is such an interesting way to tell a story, because in a lot of stories, Robb would be the main, protagonist. But no, that's through Catelyn's eyes. And we all know what we feel about her. But it's very interesting the way in which he shows us stories. Like I said, George is always looking to understand why people follow other people. He's not so much into showing us the inner workings of a leader. It's more the mindset of the people following the leader. That's why we get a lot of people, and you don't get Jaime until he's, until book 3. People in power positions, think about how many POVs that you have for them. You don't get a King Robert POV. You get Ned after, his glory days, per se,
Well, the story necessarily isn't about them.
No.
Like, the story isn't about them. The story isn't about Robb. It's not about Robert. They're minor characters. The story, it's like a coming of an age story about these children and like how they mold and shape this new world that's being built, and they're building it because they don't have a choice. They've been thrown into this situation and they're just trying to survive. And I think, well, I read A Song of Ice and Fire after Game of Thrones. I would have bet you $1,000 that Ned Stark was not going to get his head cut off.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got his head cut off, that was it. That was it. That was it. I'm hooked because I just knew, like he's my dad. Like, what do you mean? Like I love this guy and you just killed him.
Yeah.
I could not believe that. And George, I watched an interview that he did in Chicago at something festival. Can't remember. Sorry. But he basically said like a lot of his influence was from Stan Lee, Marvel Comics.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, because DC Comics was like really tropey, like everyone's happy, everyone lives. And then Marvel came along and started killing people. Like Lois Lane would die. And the feeling that no one was safe was appealing to George. And it appeals to me as a reader because when you're reading these POVs and any of these characters can die.
Stakes.
Yeah, the stakes are real.
And you have to have stakes because actions don't matter if there aren't consequences. True character only comes out if stakes are, actually apparent in your story. And it is a saga, so it is a generational story, multi-generational, as you were just speaking to. In a conventional story, King Robert and everybody and Rob going to save his dad would have the POV and it'd be through their eyes. But no, it's it's not necessarily the small folk, but it's the those on the outs. Arya, is a good example. The Starks get spread across the whole damn world. And we see them, on the outs and not in a position of power and so forth, are in a position of power, for appearance sakes, but not, in Sansa's case, going through a lot of hell. So I think it's a very intriguing way to tell a story. I always like to emphasize that George is anti-war, not a pacifist. He is just very perplexed about why people follow other people. And we see this in Sand Kings and all this idolization of, those above and all that. Why do people choose to worship this person or this religion or buy into this type of society and so forth? And I think that, it's so layered and it is so damn good. And I wish that we could have like the George we have and then like aficionado George, like typed really fast on DOS. You know what I mean? Like to get the best of both worlds, but you just don't. You got to take the goods as you get them. If you were gonna sell the story to anybody that's awaiting wins or anything like that, like what would be like hook, like as far as because this is kind of an odd situation. This is such a sensation. This is such a big deal for pop culture, not just a niche fantasy group. The whole damn world wants this book to come out. Like, what is wins going to give us? This isn't really. There's not really a precedent set for this.
I would say that wins is going to be dark. Of course, it's winter. It's finally winter. It's finally this coming threat that everybody's been talking about. So it's going to be dark. There's going to be horror. There's a lot of horror in A Song of Ice and Fire already, like in individual chapters. It's already there. But like with the like the preview chapters of The Winds of Winter, you can really see that it's going to be ramped up a little bit. And then I would say that my biggest pitch would be like, forget whatever the TV show did. Like that's fan fiction. It's not Winds of Winter. It's bullet points. There may be some broad strokes there, but the ending doesn't make sense without the journey that gets you there. And the journey that's going to get you there is going to be in Winds of Winter.
Yeah.
And Dream of Spring and possibly something about summer.
I mean, it's ending a story is always hard, right? and the budding of a rose is very beautiful, but the dwindling of the rose is a slow and, drawn out, not very exciting process. So I think that, yeah, I mean, a story is all about the journey. That is what a story is. The end might even make sense, even if you buy into how it ended. Say it makes sense, hypothetically. It doesn't matter. They didn't give you the journey, so it's not a story. It's a cliff
I
note.
cannot hypothetically say it
Oh,
makes sense.
I'm giving you an out. I'm hypothetically.
This is Justin.
If I'm not even buying it. I'm just telling you. Yeah, you didn't see my review earlier. I want to say hi to the chat really quick. What's going on? Cortex will be back with us next week. For Denny Vilvoon, I can't say his name. Thanks a lot for that one, John. He is behind Dune, and he's behind Blade Runner, the director for those. So yeah, definitely. We definitely got a lot to look forward to with George. He's also working on the prequel series. So what do you think about his return back to kind of the medium in which he started writing these books? I wouldn't say out of spite for it, but he was a little bit fed up with studio execs and network execs. So he started writing A Song of Ice and Fire, which, again, you brought up earlier, he thought could be a poem, could be a short story. No, he's like, make it 8 books, make it 10 books.
No, I said he thought it was going to be a trilogy.
Yeah, he said at first he thought it could even be a short story or a poem. He didn't know.
I think he submitted all of Daenerys' chapters as a short story and won an award for that.
Yeah.
But what did you ask me?
The House of the Dragon.
Oh yeah, House of the Dragon. I think that HBO is not playing with nobody. They are not gonna let anybody mess up their golden goose. They're not gonna let it go. They're not gonna let it go.
Is that a good thing?
Yes, it's a very good thing. It's a very good thing because I 1 second. So D&D, I've always give them the benefit of the doubt for years and years and years. But when HBO is telling you, we'll give you unlimited money, we want you to end this thing right. And when the writer of the books that you're adapting that you don't have anymore is telling you this needs to be 10 seasons, and you arrogantly, and now mind you, this is their first project that they ever did. This is the first project that they ever did. You arrogantly say, no, we're going to do it in the original amount of time that we estimated 10 years ago. I can't forgive that. I can't forgive that. Like, I can't say that's okay, because if that was my art, I would have been raised in holy hell. But it's not my art. So it's George's art, and George is okay with it. But I do think that HBO is going to be like their own showrunner. They're not going to be taking no for an it. Like they're going to do it how they want it done.
Yeah. I mean, not to get too I question how they were able to get the job in the first place, which does kind of fall on George as well. They both their resumes together didn't make sense to me to be qualified.
They're rich.
It is what it is. But yeah, my review was at the beginning for Dan and Dave. They were not good. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for these spin-offs. I was on the panel for the Age of Heroes. I didn't think that was the best idea, and it turned out it wasn't the best idea for high concept. I mean, I was intrigued by it, but I also am, there's levels. I think that's something we should talk about as I stumble upon it, actually, is how this is a high concept story, even just the books, because you can have a casual read of these books, right? There's like the people that know Westeros exists. There's people that can kind of like point to it on the fake map, and then there's people who can name every single city, right? There's layers to this game. So,
and not to cut you off, but that's what Amazon. So Amazon is adapting Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Like they went out and found super fans of Lord of the Rings. Like they got like a scholar on Lord of the Rings to come and help them do it right, because people are really passionate about Lord of the Rings. So I don't think Amazon wants to make, the same boo-boos.
Yeah, they don't want to Well, first off, it's always dangerous to try to jump into the game, as we've seen with like the DCEU and stuff like that, and try to replicate a working model. It seems desperate. Also, Tolkien is very beloved and very, obviously it should be. His work is very, very much so should be taken seriously and should be done its due diligence. So yeah, it does seem like they've got, like you said, they've got some Tolkienists on it. They seem like they're going about it in the right way. They're putting money behind it, but they're putting thought and care behind it as well, because you can. That's why I said, is it a good thing? And I think it is. I think House of the Dragon's a good thing. I don't tend to enjoy stories that just turn into cash cows, because see what I mean by that? Star Wars.
I don't think that's what it's about.
Not yet.
Because if it was about that, HBO could have at any time been like, you know what? We're going to bring in somebody else to do this. But they trusted D&D to do what they were going to do. I don't think of course they want to make money. It's a business.
Absolutely. But
I personally don't want anybody else to do it. Like, I think they are the most capable to do it. I mean, other places are, adapting stories well. Others are not. Like, Netflix is doing really good. But the level that, and the money, the budget that HBO puts out there for these shows, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that anywhere else but HBO.
Yeah, and yet you got to have people that are going to let you do. That was a big selling point for HBO, as they were willing to not make it about the blonde girl across the sea and the hero Jon Snow. They were willing to, at least for as long as Dan and Dave were willing, which unfortunately, again, wasn't the whole way. They went about 70%. But they were willing to let him do that story, because George was always afraid that, he could have optioned it out for a film, but he always knew it would just be, even at a trilogy, would just be this, kind of atypical.
I don't want to just sit here and talk about D&D. Like, I'm over D&D. I'm over D&D. And I mean, look, they did what they could do. I feel like they got arrogant. It is what it is. You can't go back and change it. I don't think we should sign petitions to do new seasons, but they also didn't sign up to adapt. They signed up to adapt A Song of Ice and Fire, and they don't have A Song of Ice and Fire. They don't have anything past Dance of Dragons. They have what we have, and then they got some bullet points. They can't be George R.R. Martin. They can't write George R.R. Martin's story. Only he can write it like he's going to write it.
What I was getting at, though, is what do you think about him working on these screen projects when the books still are not finished?
I think he is 70-something years old.
He was born in 48, so
I think he should do whatever the hell he wants to do. Like, I really do. Like, I want Winds of Winter as bad as anybody else. But, like, I understand when you're working in that kind of medium where you're writing and you need to use your imagination and you need to use your brain all day long, and then there's real life events going on around you. Like, you have to do what makes you happy. So if TV makes him happy,
yes,
then I think that's what he should do. I don't think he should be forced to write Winds of Winter until his fingers bleed. I don't think he should be chained to a chair to write Winds of Winter. Like, when he finishes it, he finishes it. When he finishes it, it will be good. Or do you want him to rush through it and it be season 8 2.0?
Yeah, no, I like that perspective, because I find a lot of people tend to think they know George. We don't know George. I like how honest he is in interviews, but let's face it, we don't know him. We don't know what he is hinging his, artistic validity off of, or any of this, his happiness. So do what makes him happy. And it seems like he really does enjoy, like I said, he does use a lot of screenwriting techniques, even in his novels. He was very much so fed up with television and the networks, as I said, kind of pushed him back over to, more prose, doing the books and all that. And now he's got the arms wide open for him, and they're ready. So whatever makes him happy, like Neil Gaiman said, he ain't our bitch. So, you
Right.
know what I mean? Like,
And
I was hoping, yeah.
his not a blog post that he put up yesterday, it really made me sad because he it sounds like he's upset that he cannot write the way that he used to. Like
Mhm.
he was saying, I used to write 150 manuscript pages a day. I don't know how I did it. I fear I will never recapture that. And like it broke my heart a little bit because just as much as we want wins, he wants to finish it. So like don't kick someone when they're obviously he's down. Like obviously to me in the blog post, it was pretty obvious that he is struggling. I mean, it's been how many years since Dance of Dragons? It's like clear he's
2001.
struggling. Just leave him alone. Like leave him alone. Leave him alone. Just as much as you want that shit, he wants to give it to you.
Yeah, he's just not going to knock it out. It's very important to him. It does seem like he's kind of put himself in a little bit of a, between a rock and a hard place, because he has an interesting take on fanfic. He doesn't like it. And it's interesting because he started off critiquing it, right? He got in Marvel Comics with his Godzooks or whatever comment that he put about the Fantastic Four, and they used to print their whole address in there. It's that famous story. So people started writing to him and sending him comics, and he'd critique them. He doesn't, now he says he can't avoid it because of the show, which, but he also, I like how honest he is. Because he's like, but I also like the money from the show. He's a real dude. He seems to be pretty honest. I'm not going to claim to understand his mindset, but I find him to be very interesting because it does seem like this show has slowed his writing process because he does not like to feed into what people think is going to happen, theories, or, any type of analysis of his work seems to kind of jam him up because of what we were talking about earlier. Just as he likes to keep us on edge of our seats, he likes to be on the edge of his seat for his own writing. So it's kind of put him out of his, again, it's like kind of a not the worst situation to be in because of his overwhelming success, but it's not advantageous to his writing style.
Yeah, I mean,
Seemingly.
OTDA asked the question. He said, "Do you think he'll live long enough to finish the whole story?" I do. Definitely. Like I definitely think he will. I actually think that by the time he's finished writing Winds, at least 20 of those chapters that he was going to put into Winds will be going into A Dream of Spring. So if he doesn't, for some reason, finish it, whether he chooses not to finish it or whatever, we aren't entitled to it. We aren't entitled to it. If he wants to finish it, he'll finish it. But he's already said nobody can finish it for him. Like he's not going to be like have Brian Sanderson come in and finish Winds of Winter. Nobody can finish it for but him. He's already said that.
Or any of you YouTuber fan fiction guys out there, yeah, you're not going to get to do it either. But it is one of those situations. He wants to finish it, obviously, right? Like I'm not going to claim to know his mindset, but it's just if he finishes if he does, of
course he wants to finish it.
My thing is, I've always thought that George is going to kind of be like bad metaphor, but like Bernie Sanders will probably never be president, but you're probably going to have somebody that Bernie Sanders inspired, 15, 20 years down the line that will have, kind of his agenda and they'll get in. George has opened up a new avenue for writers. He's really been good about encouraging diversity and true representation amongst writers, meaning saying if there's a lot of old white guys writing science fiction and horror and all this. He's like, you can't force things, like let's get other people from other walks of life writing these stories. And look at the fan base and the demographic for A Song of Ice and Fire. It is across the board. It is across, nothing else is like that. Tolkien wasn't like that. You know what I mean? So like, it's really done so much good is my point. And yes, I want it to be finished as well, but I really think it's going to serve as like this door that's now just been blown open by him for future writers to explore his stylistic approach. Yes, they won't be George, but we will see this type of writing until that gets so basic bitch that they're like, oh, that's so George R.R. Martin, we got to switch it up again, and they'll go back to regular high fantasy. I'm joking, but
I agree with Swantivia Major so hard right now She said he's 4 years younger than my parents. He doesn't necessarily have one foot in the ground. I think that's like so inappropriate for like people
That's
to say
that's
that
why I'm
kind of
not
stuff. Like,
commenting
you
on
know
it.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to say that
It,
he might die or like to, and he hates that, by the way. Like
yeah.
he said like that really offends him.
Nobody likes that. I would just say, like, very probably like a sadist might like. I don't know, but yeah, yeah, he already is full of existentialism. Not give him more. Yeah, that's why I didn't even comment on it. That's just saying, oh, do you think he's gonna die before he finishes? It's very selfish. But again, he made a story we all like, so I think it's just maybe misguided. Fan, I don't know. It's not okay. Just don't. Let's not predict his death. So hopefully he gets it done. I think that it has more to do with his mindset than his health, to be honest with you.
Yeah, just like I can't even imagine writing okay. One of you, what you said, one of your favorite parts was the food, the description.
No, I did not. First of all, I did not say that. I said, but it's interesting because he's very descriptive because he doesn't say they feast. You get to know what these people like because you get to know these people. So when they die, it actually matters. It's not just a statistic. It's not this many people died. You care because he humanizes them. You know, it's
True.
personification.
True, but
Not my favorite part.
I know, but imagine him writing, like that's the type of shit he has to write. He has to write all the food. He has to write how they get from place to place. He has to worry about all these plots. He adds symbolism and folklore. He adds all these different layers to his writing. He has a world book and like 300 years worth of history that he has to make sure that he doesn't contradict. So there's a lot that goes into it. So if you've never written a series of this magnitude, I've never written a paragraph of this like as the magnitude of A Song of Ice and Fire. So I just feel like it's unfair to put him on a timetable. Like, of course, he wishes he could be Stephen King and release a new book every month.
Yeah, Stephen King has a bunch of different pen names not to oversaturate the brand, but Stephen King doesn't understand like how George writes. It just as George doesn't. They have a very good 2.5 hour interview. I recommend you guys watch. They have a lot of respect for each other, and it's just a different approach to writing. Hey, Stephen King will tell you too. He makes fun of it. His endings aren't all that great. So, you know what I mean? But he gets it done. But it's not that he doesn't care. And I think what it comes down to too is like it's misguided. Like, you know, it's not meant to be morbid or anything like that. So I'm not down on anybody this way. It's an obvious thing to wonder. It's like, well, I hope he sticks around long enough so the books can get finished. But it's a little bit selfish. And that's why I try to stay clear of that. But something that you brought up about the layering of it, a really good response. I put it on Reddit. And I usually don't enjoy Reddit that much, about what they thought was special about George's writing. And one really good comment talked about the causality. They didn't say causality, I did. But meaning like Tywin wouldn't have gotten to King's Landing in time if Tyrion's scouts wouldn't have done this. And, you know, if something, I forget what it was that happens at River Run. So the thing is you have all these separate threads, but they all do mean something and they all come together, even in the smallest little ways. So like you have this big, vast world and everybody's separated. The distance, like you said, like matters, everything. I mean, Rob dies for a bridge. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's very nuanced and detailed and it matters too. It's not just like, ooh, look at this new town and look at this new character.
Yeah.
Steve. What's Steve all about? Let me write more about. No, it's got a point. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's very, very good. I think the House of the Dragon is a very smart project. I think that it's high concept. I think that's what people want to see. I think the Targaryens are something that we got just the taste of, obviously, and it left a foul taste in our mouth the way they served it up at the end. Mm-hmm. So I think it's smart, meaning I think it's smart for the wider, broader audience because that's just, as we talked about, these books are good at a base level, meaning if you just want to have a fun read, you want to be crazy about it like us, you know what I mean? Like you can also do that. There's like so many levels to being a George fan.
Yeah, but the one thing I will say about A Song of Ice, sorry, I worked 12 hours a day and came home to do this. We've been playing this for like a month and a half. So one thing I will say about George and about A Song of Ice and Fire is that every time you reread it, you find something new. Every time there's something that you did not notice or you did not pick up the first time you read it, or the second time, or the third. It, every time. Every time.
And I'm just, and again, thanks to Obsidian Nights, honestly, I would have done the reread so I could do the podcast with you, but no, I'm not, I messaged you and I was like, I'm never just like, oh, it's good, if it's not good. But I mean, this is some like prime gray area. I love the commentary on the, everything else you're doing. I think you're one of the best out there, obviously. Known you for a long time. But I love me some old school, like, gray lore, like the old school video. And this podcast just brings me back to that. And it brings me back to that time when I was reading for the first time. Because I watched like 2 seasons before I even read one of the books. You know what I mean? Oh, I wasn't a book first guy. I wasn't there first. A book firster. So, yeah, I really enjoy it. I mean, and it is so good. I spoke briefly about Bernard Cromwell, which, he's the guy behind The Last Kingdom, the books behind that, the Saxon stories. And, like, I made a comment before that he does battle better than George. But there's very few things that, I think that the battles in those stories are really good, but nothing else is better. Like, George does trump a lot of these authors in so many ways.
World building.
Yeah, it's insane.
World building.
And it's not like the others don't world build. He just still kills them in it.
No, but see, a lot of authors, they have the benefit of writing their stories in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have to really build a world. Now, in fantasy and sci-fi, and I mean some of Stephen King's stories, he did really build a world, but I'm just saying. But like a lot of authors write stories in this world, so they don't have to worry about that. But he's building a world from the ground up. And I feel like Bravos is a place that I can go to and I can go to Southwest right now and book a flight there. That's how real it feels. From the way he describes the smell or the fog, the harbors being like segregated by rich and poor, or people that were born there and traders.
Yeah, it's like the Italian city states, and that's what's so great about it. There's that taste of the real world in it. And I've always said this,
it's definitely Venice.
Fantasy is a beautiful vehicle for truth because it's not tied down to the conventions of this time or that time, and it can live for longer. Your story can live longer off-world in your story on this world because it's not tied to a certain time, a certain area, a stigma, a this or that. You craft it all. So it takes a hell of a lot more work, as George most likely knows. But hey, it makes something that lives for a lot longer. That's why Tolkien's stories live a lot longer, because it's not like, oh, what was happening in England in 1932 or 1841? No. It's what's going on in Middle Earth, what's going on here.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with George. That's one thing I would say is that he takes these historical events. Like, it's the only historical fantasy series that I really know about. Fantasy, like successful historical fantasy. So when George goes and takes events like the Black Dinner and makes that, like, turns that up a couple notches, and makes that like, a plot point in his book, or when he takes the War of the Roses and bases his plot points off of that, like it's like he's telling a story, but he's also telling you history as well.
He's sharing a part of his life and a part of what because he's stated that he doesn't just read fantasy detective stories. He reads mystery, he reads all these different genres, and we see that with the, mix mash of which is beautiful of his work. You can't call it just fantasy. You can't call it just horror and fantasy mix. It's a psychological thriller. It's all these things, right? It's historical,
a murder mystery,
all these things, and he's sharing that with you. He loves history, So he's sharing that what you only can write what you know, you know?
And
So
you only can know what you read.
yes.
And I think like one of his advice for people
Read.
that want to be writers is to read as much as you can. Like I really love Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And George has said it's one of his big inspirations. And what they both do, what Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn does, and what A Song of Ice and Fire does, is they incorporate a lot of myth and folklore. And they're basically Tad said that they're drawing from the same veins, the same fantasy lore veins. And they put together two really good stories by doing that. And I would say like George is probably one of the best read people I've ever seen. Like I just hear him talk about all these books that he's reading and plans to read, and I'm like, whoa.
I talked to I had him on Steven Kelselwitz. He does all the Breaking Bad books and the Better Call Saul books, blah blah blah. And I asked him, I go, what's the best like degree if you want to be a writer, you know? And I go, it seems to me like it's journalism, because and that is what George has a degree in. He never actually was a journalist, but journalism teaches you first off how to you just got to write if you're a journalist, but also creative nonfiction, meaning you're writing something in a entertaining way, but it's not a story you made up. So think about that literary skill set, which you have to have on your tool belt. You have storytelling skills and then literary skills. You have a story inside your head. Your literary skills need to help transfer that onto paper, or your DOS, your WordStar, or your computer. So I think that his journalism background, it's not utilized, but I think a lot of the best writers have that journalist background. It just seems.
I think that's a waste of fucking money. Don't go to school and
I'm not shilling college. But I'm just saying.
Don't go to school and make journalism your major. Just go on YouTube and start talking to people and writing stories about things that you care about. Because I hated journalism class in high school. I hated that shit.
Well,
and I think my mom would have probably had a stroke if I would have said, I'm going to college, but my major it's not going to be science anymore. It's going to be journalism.
Yeah. Well, you heard it first here. When you go to school and sign up, you'd be like, well, Gray did hate that shit, so I might not do it. Yeah, make your own decisions. I'm not shilling either way. Yeah, I'm just ranting here. I find it interesting. Fuck school. I find it interesting that a lot of them do have journalism degrees at least. But yeah, it's probably not a safe bet just to go get a degree to help maybe back your fantasy novel that you're going to get out there. Also, he says write short stories. Don't start trying to write a saga. It's probably, if you haven't built a house, build a shed first, not a mansion. Yeah.
Don't listen to Justin. Build what you want.
Just, might not get passed by the zoning board. But no, it's been fantastic. Gray, any last, sentiment to spread here about George's great storytelling?
The last sentiment I will say is leave him alone and let him write his books. We will get them. I have faith that we will get them. And just put positive vibes in the air. Positive vibes in the air that we have not only Winds of Winter next year, but also House of the Dragon.
Absolutely. And if I could get turned back on to reading these books again, anybody can, because I was pretty burnt out on it all. So check out the Obsidian Knights. Support Gray Area on Patreon. Hey, support this guy on Patreon too. I'm a good guy. Support creativity. And I can't wait to come on and talk about Ned too. Can't wait to see what happens with that wacky fella. He's going places. Got a good head on his shoulders. So thank you guys so much. Thank you as always, Gray. And we will see you guys next week for Denis Villeneuve. I cannot say his name. He needs to get, I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll get maybe Wicca
Who
speak
is
or whatever.
it?
It's the guy, it's the director for the new Dune.
Denis Villeneuve?
Denis Villeneuve. I don't know. Villeneuve. I don't know.
Oh.
Denny V. We'll make that a thing. So
okie dokie.
Yep. And then we got plenty more coming. We got Tolkien and everybody, Spielberg, and Stephen King as well. a whole bunch of them coming. So we will close it out for you guys. Thank you again, Gray.
Bye, guys.